Welcome back to another episode of Crowd Control. This is our third episode, and this week's theme is video games.
Yeah, this is a huge week for crowdfunding releases.
Giant week.
And yeah, for some reason, this seems to be the week to launch video game to board game adaptations. We have 3 huge video game properties coming to crowdfunding this week, and then we're going to talk about all 3 of them, plus a little bit about some games that are running right now that we wanted to discuss. But yeah, we should jump in because these games are gigantic.
Yeah, all of the games are gigantic, but the games that we're talking about that are based on the games also seem like they're going to probably be pretty big campaigns. And we're going to actually, once we talk about them, we might even talk about which one we think is going to be the biggest.
Well, the first one, this might be one of the biggest content-wise, and this is Apex Legends.
Oh, for sure, of the ones
coming to Kickstarter.
Yeah,
and this is from Glass Cannon Unplugged, who did the Frostpunk board game, which was another video game adaptation. I mean, I'm a big Apex player, and if you're a big Apex player, you kind of already understand what Apex is, but it is a team-based shooter where you're fielding a team of miniatures who are all based on the Apex characters, and you're going at it against another team in a tactical skirmish game on a huge 3D map with 3D buildings and all, just all this terrain. It has a very cool looking table presence.
So this is going to be something along the lines of like a Marvel Crisis Protocol type
game?
I
mean, this is, I don't know how much of the LCG model they're going to have, or how many releases they're going to have, or if it's just like you get this box and the expansions, but there's going to be a ton of different characters to choose from to field your team. And while we obviously haven't gotten to play the game because it's just now coming out, they're promising all of that, like that movement ability that you see in Apex, that fast-paced combat that you see in Apex, all of that is going to be present in the board game as well.
Yeah, I mean, just based on the components that I saw alone in some of the photos, they would suggest there's a pretty robust system at play.
Yeah.
They had some really cool pieces that had like tiles on top of miniature bases and stuff like that signified, I assume, how this thing was going to be activating or operating. Yeah, it looks really cool. I'm not a big Apex player. You are a big Apex player?
Yeah, I played a ton of Apex. I mean, especially when Apex first came out. And I know a lot of people, it is a very, very popular game. It's very fast-paced. There's a lot of emphasis on moving quickly, moving from these different terrain levels, which is why you'll see, if you're looking at the images right now, those multi-tiered structures that are going to come on the game board. And this, too, we don't know. We don't get a lot of inside information all the time, so I have no idea what this thing is going to cost or what their plans are for stretch goals, but this seems like a system that's just infinitely expandable with different maps and different terrain pieces and things like that.
Yeah, we've got 2 more to talk about, but that one and maybe one of the other 2 is going to have a ton of what you'd consider typical in a lot of big crowdfunding campaigns these days because of like tons of miniatures, tons of pieces. Look good. And I will say, I'm going to give this one the early, candidate for biggest because not money-wise necessarily, but man, some of the spreads of the components that they have online are massive.
Maybe money-wise too. I mean, Apex audience is huge, and the skirmish game audience, tactical miniatures game audience is huge, and this just seems like a pairing that was designed to be. Now, we wanted to talk about a little bit briefly. I think it's a neat idea that they went with the full simulation tactical route instead of a more abstract. Some video games do take a more abstract route. The one that we're going to talk about next, I think, did that.
Yes, in fact, we had a chance to play it. This one is Dead Cells. And if you know Dead Cells at all, you kind of have to imagine on the tabletop, it's going to have to take an abstracted approach, right? You can't, in Apex, it makes sense. You have miniatures, you're moving guys around, you're fighting each other. Dead Cells is a little different, and you could go a couple different routes. They have effectively broken it down, and we have other content up on the channel or coming up on the channel this week on the game as well. But they've broken down into a few different things. The interesting thing being, or the most interesting thing, is this is a game that continues to evolve. It really tries to recreate that roguelite experience where you're going to run into some brick walls probably pretty quickly. You're going to die. Then you're going to sort of enhance things. You get mutations and whatnot to kind of like give yourself a little better chance. And you go for another run. Hopefully you get a little further and do that again and again until you can get to a boss, or maybe you can get past that boss to another level. Now, the prototype we had didn't have everything included, I don't think, but we did have
definitely didn't.
Just 2 of the biomes and then 1 of the bosses, which I assume kind of just signifies the very first
arc, if you want to call it, first
very
part.
small first arc of the game.
Yeah.
But you are effectively, the abstracted part, in my opinion, is where you're running through the biome, because you're simply going to location, flipping tiles to see what's going to be there. Now, some of these tiles you can tell are enemy encounters, some are going to be other types of encounters, some you're just going to be finding something. The other part of the game is that combat, and the combat is really the other big meaty part of the game. And this is where you encounter an enemy. You got on this whole separate board, and it has kind of an interesting, innovative combat system where you are located on this board, and then there's potentially an enemy behind you, which can happen in Dead Cells if you've ever played. And then a few spaces for enemies in front of you. And then there's 3 standard combat rounds. And you go through these cards, everyone's kind of playing cooperatively, but you can't completely communicate thoroughly what's on your cards that you're picking. And then you're trying to puzzle your way through, trying to make sure you take out the enemies before they take you out. But in most of those circumstances, you don't have to, you just have to survive it. So you want to kill as many of those enemies as possible, pick up some cells, pick up some gold teeth, and then hopefully spend those when you do die, because you will.
Yeah. Take a look at our video for more. The one thing I wanted to say that I really like about this game, or the approach they're taking, that makes it feel a lot like that video game experience, is that there's an ongoing sense of progression. Every time you set up the game, you're going to have all the stuff you had in your previous plays. It just keeps adding to it. So every time you start a new run or a new game for your game day or whatever, you're going to be starting off at a little bit better of a state than you were before, allowing you to get a little bit farther. And I think that's very cool to have that in a game. Now, I don't know what the overlap is here between Dead Cells fans and board game fans.
Well,
who knows?
Take a look at Slay the Spire.
Slay the Spire did really well.
I mean, it's not exactly the same sort of game, but I do feel that Slay the Spire, I could be talking way out of turn. I think Slay the Spire and Dead Cells probably have fan bases on par with one another.
Sure, they have a similar level of fan, and a lot of overlap too.
Fair amount of overlap, but they're both sizable game IPs. So I'll be very interested to see what this does. And it's coming from Scorpion Masqué and a design team that's got a pretty good pedigree.
Yeah, they really do. Now, this next game that's also launching next week already was on Kickstarter or Gamefound once before. So we kind of have some metric, but this is Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now, this is not really an expansion to the Monster Hunter World game. This is a standalone set of monsters, characters, and content. You can cross-match them with the content from the previous games, but also, if you're new to Monster Hunter World, this is the only box you're going to need. And this is this game did really well. It was over $3 million raised for the original campaign, and word of mouth has been very positive for this game. So I'm imagining people are coming back, original backers coming back to get Iceborne, new backers coming back for the chance to get both sets. But it's very cool. And if you've never played Monster Hunter World, you should. This is a very addicting game where you're
talking about the video game
and the board game too, but you're literally just hunting these monsters, and you're choosing your characters, you're equipping your characters with what you think they need for the hunt, and you're going out to this almost open world where you're going to be going through a variety of different decisions of what approach should we take, which path should we take, how should we hunt these things, and then eventually hoping you find the monster. And the open world is filled with all these monsters. So you might end up fighting some other monsters on your way to complete side quests and things like that. As you kill monsters, you're getting items back, kind of like in Dead Cells. Mm-hmm. You're getting stuff back to improve your weapon so that when you go out on your next hunt, you're a little better, and those things will carry from game to game. And what's really cool too, just like in the video game, you can kind of kite around, or you can lure these monsters into battling, and you could make other monsters fight each other and just kind of sit back and let them battle it out and take the rewards when they're done.
Yeah,
the
cool. Tabletop experience definitely revolves mostly around that sort of arena combat experience where you're facing off against the monster, and there's these nodes on the board. You're kind of moving around, like you said, trying to use your maneuvers, learn what the monster is doing, because like a lot of their other games, this is one of those games where you're trying to figure out, okay, how does this monster behave? What is the sort of phases it's going to go through so we can better understand how to take it on.
The AI deck kind of gives you a little bit of information kind of to reflect that hunter's knowledge that you have, so you kind of have some guesses as to what the monster is going to do next. It's a very fun cooperative boss battling system, and the first game did 3 million or over 3 million. I think that this could easily reach those numbers.
Yeah, all 3 of these could be massive. I don't even like we talked about like making our picks before we started recording, and let's go ahead and do it. I don't know that this is going to be accurate. I am no expert, but I do think all three of these are going to be very large campaigns. I don't think any of them is going to be way behind any of the others, but
no.
The fact that Monster Hunter has that track record already built in, the difference being how many of those people are just going to be getting Iceborne as an add-on to what they already have versus like being first-time backers. And then you've got, I don't know what the price points are.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I'm guessing the price points
this week. So.
Yeah, on something like Monster Hunter and Apex, the price points are probably going to be, I would think, significantly higher than, say, Dead Cells.
With the amount of content that comes with, and but again, both of those, Monster Hunter, I think, is a bigger package, whereas Apex is probably going to have a smaller starting set and then letting you add on things or like maybe work your way to an all-in pledge that comes with everything. But I wouldn't be surprised if Apex did have a smaller scale, like starting core box.
Probably.
Where I think, Dead Cells, I think, is just going to be that one box and then probably some add-ons.
It's probably going to have some more. Plus, I think
bosses.
What Dead Cells has going for it in this little three-way fight that we're talking about is the mass appeal of the IP. I think it probably has as much mass appeal, and I think it's probably a more accessible game as well. So we'll have to see. But I'm going to go ahead and pick, I'm going to cop out and say Monster Hunter just because we've got a known quantity.
I'm actually going to say Apex. I think Apex is going to do surprisingly well.
Let's wait and see, and Dead Cells will come up and beat them both.
It could be. They're all three very popular.
It should be very interesting to watch. Now, we have one more game to talk about, but there's a couple things that I want to predicate that on. One, we're not going to talk about it. Yeah. Two, it's not about video games. It's our friend Nelson Oliver, and he's here to tell you a little bit about whether he's going to back or maybe he won't back. He's kind of on the fence for a game called Disrupt.
Hey, I'm Nelson from Nelson All Over, and today I wanted to talk to you all about a game that's recently caught my attention, and that is Disrupt. So this is a game coming to Kickstarter from Triple Meeple and has pretty much every buzzword that I look for in a game. It's going to be asymmetric, worker placement, card-driven, economic game, which are all some of my favorite mechanisms. It's going to be a game where players are attempting to found the next big startup company. They're taking on a specific role which will help influence their own business in a certain way. For example, like the angel investor needs to predict what will happen and only invest in projects that they think will succeed, while the market leader actually starts the game winning, and they need to maintain that status throughout the entire game. Seems like a really fascinating game that has so many different combinations of players and roles, and that's also where I get a little bit nervous. So I'm curious if this is going to be a game that I can play with anybody, or if it's going to be so complex and so asymmetric that I need a dedicated play group that are all on the same level of understanding with the game, and that can be a little tough. It does sound like an awesome game, and there's not a whole lot of information out about it right now, so I'm excited to see the full page when it does launch on Kickstarter and do a bit more research at that time. All that being said, if you mention asymmetric economic game, then I'm going to get excited, and that's why Disrupt caught my attention. See ya.
Thank you, Nelson. And for you watching out there, Nelson might pop up on a few more things from time to time. Met him recently, and he brings, like many people that we're going to try to have coming on the channel or on this program, brings a different perspective. And in this case, a game that I hadn't even heard about.
No, that's the thing, trying to do this show and researching all these different games. Still, some things just slip through the cracks, which is why I want to mention last week. We didn't talk about what was launching last week because we weren't really sure. Sometimes you don't know a game's going to launch until it launches.
It's hard to track all this down.
It is, and this one kind of caught me by surprise, but it was All Plays, which is Board Game Tables, their new company, or All Play, released their crowdfunding campaign for their trick-taking games. You can get 4 different trick-taking games. It's Pies, Mori, Lunar, and Bacon. It's already over $100,000 raised. So obviously a very, very popular game. And then secondly, I don't want to talk about this too much because we have tons of content about the actual core version of this game on the channel. But Detective is back with the new expansion on Gamefound.
We have some content. We don't have a ton.
Saints and Sinners is on right now too from Van Ryder Games. I definitely think that one is also worth checking out. It's been a big week for game releases.
This week is going to be massive. Like we said before on the show, it's kind of feast or famine sometimes. This is a feast week for sure.
Right.
And one more thing about Detective, I think the big takeaway there is this has been a game that's not exactly been easy to get a hold of for a while.
That's true. This is your chance.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a big part of why they're bringing this back, but with even more content.
With even more content, because it's a cool narrative game, and once you've played through the narratives, you kind of know the narrative, so that you're always wanting new cases and things like that to supplement the game. So I'm very excited about this one.
Yeah, so that's probably just scratching the surface of what's happening in crowdfunding this week.
We could have done a two-parter on this week,
If
honestly.
you guys have any questions about what we've talked about, or if you have some campaigns that we didn't mention here that you want to mention down in the comments, get down there and talk about them. We'll get down there and talk about it with you. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.